101 ESPN presents a salute to the life of Stan Musial.
Take a good look, fans. Take a good look. This might be the last time at bat. Remember the stance and the swing. You're not likely to see his likes again. The pitch to Musial. A hot shot on the ground into right field. A base hit. First throw around third. No throw. The Cardinals lead 1-0.
I stayed till 1963 playing against men who would be playing in the 1970s. So I think I can feel qualified to say that baseball really was a great game. And baseball is really a great game. And baseball will always be a great game. So it's a pleasure and honor to be part of this great game. And I hope that I gave baseball as much as it gave to me. And thank you for listening from the most wonderful honor of my career.
Here's your host, Randy Karraker.
Stanley Frank Musial has passed away at the age of 92. In a town acclaimed as America's best baseball town, he was, and apparently always will be, the king. In baseball heaven, the Archangel. A record 24-time All-Star, Musial is the Cardinals' all-time leader in games, at-bats, runs, hits, total bases, singles, doubles, triples, home runs, RBIs, walks, and extra base hits. In addition to his prodigious baseball playing ability, Musial was a businessman and a statesman. After his playing days, he led the Cardinals to a world championship in his only year as the franchise's general manager. He operated a successful restaurant, Stan Musial and Biggie's, and for many years, he also invested in a television station, a bowling alley, banks, and hotels here in Miami and in Clearwater, Florida. As a statesman, Stan donated time and money to promoting baseball here and in other states, and to the homeland of his ancestors in Poland. There's a field bearing Musial's name in Kutno, Poland, and he was awarded Poland's highest civilian honor, the Cavalier Cross of the Order of Merit. Musial served in the Navy during the prime of his career in 1945. He was the first chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness. When charities such as the Crippled Children's Society of St. Louis, the USO, the Boy Scouts, the Senior Olympics, and the Muscular Dystrophy Association came calling, Stan was more than happy to lend his name and his time. He signed thousands and thousands of autographs. He endeared thousands of fans, not only to himself, but to baseball. He was placed in the Polish National Hall of Fame and on February 15, 2011, was awarded America's highest civilian honor as President Barack Obama bestowed upon him the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Well, this is a great honor, and for reading your President's Medal of Honor, and it's the best gift I have ever received in my lifetime.
Stan Musial. His brilliance could come in blinding bursts, hitting 5 home runs in a single day's doubleheader, leading the league in singles, doubles, triples, and RBIs over a single season. 3 World Series. He retired with 17 records, even as he missed a season in his prime to serve his country in the Navy. Stan remains to this day an icon, untarnished, a beloved pillar of the community, a gentleman you'd want your kids to emulate.
Musial was the everyman. He related to everyone and would do anything for the community. Fellow Cardinal Hall of Famer Ozzie Smith recognized that whenever they were together.
Hardly ever have I ever been around him and he not be jovial. You know, he's always had a smile, and I think it's what has endeared him to the people. You know, the fact that he is always so friendly, always approachable, and, you know, that's just off the field. And, you know, his numbers speak for themselves as far as on the field is concerned. He's one of the greatest players that the game has ever seen, and certainly has earned the name The Man.
Now we have lost our most decorated, most beloved St. Louisan, Stan Musial, passing away at the age of 92. He was, as Baseball Commissioner Ford Frick said at the dedication of his statue, baseball's happy warrior, baseball's perfect knight. He was, as labeled by frustrated Brooklyn Dodger fans, the man, and he has been for more than 60 years St. Louis' greatest ambassador, our shining light. Stan Musial will be remembered as one of the handful of the best players ever to play the game, as a smiling, harmonica-playing statesman, and he'll always be remembered, as he was in life, as the man in St. Louis. Stan was born in the western Pennsylvania steel town of Donora, Pennsylvania, on November 21st, 1920. His father, Lucas, was a Polish immigrant, and his mother, who was born in New York, arrived in Donora at the age of 8. As a teenager, Stan met his future wife and the love of his life, Lil. He also played American Legion baseball. His high school didn't have a team, and he impressed scouts with his arm and his bat. The Cardinals had a farm team 2 miles away from Donora High School, managed by a gentleman named Ollie Vanek. When Musial was 16, Vanek went to the Musial home and tried to get Stan to commit to signing with the Cardinals. Lucas Musial was against the move and, in fact, prohibited it. It was required that a player be 18 to sign a contract, and Lucas wouldn't allow Stan to do so. According to George Vesey's book, Stan Musial, An American Life, Stan contended that his dad wanted him to accept a basketball scholarship at the University of Pittsburgh. Family friends say it was because the family was poor and the father wanted his son to work. The Cardinals were undeterred, and in September of 1937, Mary Musial prevailed over her husband to let Stan sign with the Cardinals and start a career that would land him in St. Louis for the rest of his life. Stan started out as a pitcher in the Cardinal organization, though it was clear he could hit, too. Playing for the Daytona minor league team in 1940, he would occasionally play outfield when he didn't pitch because there just weren't enough players to field an everyday lineup. In August of that year, Stan dove for a ball in the outfield and injured his left pitching shoulder, an injury that would go down as one of the most fortuitous in baseball history. Musial was moved to the outfield, and he hit and hit and hit. In 1941, he played 87 games at Springfield, hitting .379 with 26 homers and 94 RBIs. Then he was called up to Rochester, where he hit .326 in 54 games. With starting outfielders Enos Slaughter, Terry Moore, and Johnny Mize injured, the Cardinals brought Musial to St. Louis as a September call-up. In 6 months, he had gone from pitching batting practice to a Double-A team to playing outfield in the majors. Making his debut on September 17th of 1941, Stan went 2 for 4 in his first game and 6 for 12 in his first 3. In 12 games in his first month in the majors, Musial hit .426 with a homer and 7 runs batted in. Displaying an unorthodox crouch in his stance, Musial would uncoil and attack the baseball. There wasn't a ton of video to break down the swing, but former Cardinal manager Tony La Russa saw enough to know how it worked so well.
Once you watch him stride into the ball, his bat was always back, and he could whistle the ball to all parts of the outfield. Take the ball outside the left field, hit 3,000, went to left center. He could hook the ball to right field. He could hit the ball to dead center. So he had this amazing ability to keep the bat back. Evidently had wonderful eyesight. And even though he was moving forward, his head would stay still and his bat would stay back, and he would make the adjustment. So if I was watching him for the first time as a coach, after a few swings, I kept seeing that ball get on the barrel and be hit hard all over the park. I wouldn't do anything but just admire it and not touch it.
For 23 years, Musial compiled mind-boggling numbers. Right now, nearly a half-century after he retired, he's 6th all-time in games played, 30th all-time in batting average, 13th all-time in OPS, 9th in runs, 4th in hits, behind only Pete Rose, Ty Cobb, and Henry Aaron. Musial is 2nd in total bases, 3rd in doubles, 6th in RBIs, 3rd in extra base hits, 6th in times on base, and for you sabermetricians, 9th in wins above replacement. In his first full season, Stan helped the Cardinals to the first of his 3 world championships, hitting .315 in his rookie year with 10 homers and 72 RBIs. The Cardinals beat the Yankees in 5 games to win the World Series. Cardinal Hall of Fame manager Whitey Herzog is 80 now. He's known about Musial since he was a little kid.
The first major league game I seen, I was 10 years old. I came to a night game with my mom and dad, and we sat in the first row of the upper deck right behind first base, and Stan was playing first base. And they were playing Brooklyn. And that's the day that Walker Cooper and Mickey Owen got into the fight, and I'll never forget that. And I think the first game I really took a liking, not just a liking, that Stan kind of became my idol. He got 5 doubles and off the screen. And I was so elated watching him, how he swung and how he lined that ball off the screen and how he rounded first and how he'd go in the second hustling all the way, that I went home over to some friends of mine. I was hitchhiked across the river and got over East St. Louis and stayed with some friends that used to live in New Athens because their dad worked at a Lunamore during the war. And we played ball in a lot next to their house, and I started copying Musial stance. And I always tell Stan to this day that he ruined my career because once I copied his stance, I was never worth a darn.
In his second full season, 1943, Musial won the first of his 3 MVP awards. He hit .357 with 13 home runs and 81 runs batted in, with 48 doubles and an amazing 20 triples. The Cardinals lost the World Series to the Yankees that year. St. Louis won another World Series over the St. Louis Browns in 1944. Stan won the MVP in the championship season of 1946 and won his third and final MVP in 1948. That season, he led the league with a .376 average and 131 RBIs and was second in the NL with 39 home runs. Were it not for a rained-out homer, Musial, rather than former Cardinal Joe Medwick, would be the last National League Triple Crown winner. He hit .331 for his career with 475 home runs and 1,951 runs batted in. Former Cardinal manager Tony La Russa wishes more people knew about those numbers and that man.
You look at the numbers themselves. I was sent a piece that somebody did, and I made sure I kept a copy of it. It was about 4 or 5 pages long, and I made sure that we had a copy made of that long piece put on everybody's chair in spring training, just so they could appreciate and be reminded of. I bet you say he's a great player, but when you look at what his accomplishments were, his numbers, they're unbelievable, and they're so unbelievable that you understand. He's one of the greatest players of all time. So I think history is critical. In all types of history, but if you're in a profession, you should definitely have an awareness of what's gone on before you and how things have come to be. And so you're talking about professional baseball, you're talking about different players from different organizations, you're talking about different organizations, you're talking about ownership, commissioners, unions. But when you talk about your organization, that's one thing that, and I think around baseball, it's very well known that forever the Cardinals and the Cardinal fans have always opened their hearts to past Cardinals. And then, this has been an organization that's just been really blessed with great players, pitchers, but the key has always been they seem to be great people as well. So I think the truth is that, history's lost on a lot of young guys. It's just amazing how they don't pay attention. They're just so much into what's happening now, but you can't help but understand it when you're with the Cardinals, because the organization makes such a point of including the heroes of the past in your everyday life, whether it's spring training or throughout the season. And at the top of that list, is Stan Musial. Of course, Stan and I always put Red together. The two of them together are like a quinella. But early on, when you get here, you recognize that there's been a great history here, and the fact that they're living and they're so approachable adds a lot to your experience.
Some of the highlights, of course, the 3 World Series wins were huge. So were Stan's All-Star exploits. He played in 24 All-Star games, winning the 1955 Midsummer Classic.
In the last half of the 12th inning, the National League sends up Stan Musial, Willie Mays, and Ted Kluszewski facing the big right-hander Frank Sullivan. Nobody on base and nobody out. Sullivan's first pitch to Stan is swung on as a drive back into right field. A long one. The ball game is over.
He's second all-time in All-Star hits and All-Star runs and holds the record with 6 All-Star homers. Stan Musial was a civil rights advocate all his life. When Jackie Robinson crossed baseball's color barrier in 1947, Stan was one of the white players that welcomed him into the major leagues. And that's something Bob Costas says must be noted when looking at Musial's life.
This part becomes important. Not only all of Stan's charity work and his trips on behalf of the USO and that sort of thing, but there are certain stances, principled stances, that transcend Republican or Democrat. As it happens, Stan was, so far as I know, a lifelong Democrat. But I think we can all agree, especially before a national consensus was reached, that being on the side of the Angels when it comes to civil rights was something that everybody of his time wished, in retrospect, they were able to say. But not all of them could. But if you listen to the testimony of people like Hank Aaron or Jackie Robinson when he was around, among the prominent white players, the already established star players, perhaps the guy who was most helpful, most welcoming, and most consistently on the side of the Angels when it came to the integration of baseball and the general push for equality, not just in the game but in society. Stan Musial was there, and that's an important plus.
Herzog told Bernie Miklasz about witnessing Musial's kindness firsthand when black players first started playing in the major leagues and what a difference it made for everyone.
I was at the first game that Jackie Robinson came to Sportsman's Park, and Brooklyn was wearing them satin uniforms, I remember then, and the game got rained out. And in those days, they didn't have the money to spend. As soon as the rain started and they put the tarp on, it got black. You know, they turned off the lights because they didn't want to pay the light bill. And later on, I remember some of the problems we had. You know, Slaughter, who was from the Carolinas, and the Walker brothers, Dixie at Brooklyn, and of course Harry here. They didn't like the idea that they was being integrated, but that's because they were from the South. They were brought up that way. And I can remember, Bernie, even when I went down to Mexico in the 50s, and I played down there in winter ball a couple of years, you know, it was altogether different. You know, they had their own places they sat. They had their own places for the towels. They had their other places for water. It was almost like they were different human beings. And then all of a sudden, it got pretty good, pretty fast. I thought the improvement went because of people like Musial, because some of the veterans in the big leagues accepted them for what they were, major league ball players with major league ability, and not by the color of their skin. And that's where Stan was number one.
As a man and as a player, Stan was the picture of consistency. He holds the record for the most consecutive 300 seasons with 16 between 1941 and 1958, with a year lost to the war. Of his 3,630 hits, 1,815 came at home, 1,815 came on the road. Number 3,000 came at Wrigley Field in Chicago on May 13th, 1958. Stan the Man and manager Fred Hutchinson thought with Stan at 2,999 hits, he could get a rest on the final game of a road trip and reach the milestone at home. But with the Cardinals trailing in the sixth inning, Hutchinson decided to pinch hit for pitcher Sam Jones with Musial.
Stan waits. Now the stretch from the belt. Here's the pitch. Line drive, there it is! Into left field! Hit number 3,000! A run is scored! Musial around first! On his way to second with a double! Holy cow, he came through! Listen to the crowd! Time is called! Standing ovation! Here the photographers out on the field. The first man since Paul Weiner in 1942. Stan Musial has just gotten his 3,000th hit.
That was a great moment, but Musial didn't have one defining moment that every baseball fan is aware of. And Bob Costas thinks that might contribute to slights like Stan having to be placed on the All-Century team by Bud Selig because fans didn't vote him in 1999.
Part of the reason that Stan nationally is kind of overlooked, you know, Williams, last man to hit 400. There's something to hang your hat on. Willie Mays, the say-hey kid, greatest all-round player, the catch in the 54 World Series. Even Mickey Mantle, whose career achievements fall short of Musial and some of the others, at the time that he was at his best, he was the greatest combination of natural power and speed that the game had ever seen, plus he played in New York. Hank Aaron was overlooked for a long time, but became the all-time home run king, so there's your signature line about him, and he's still obviously the legitimate all-time home run king. And Williams, like the quote said, hit a home run in his last time at bat, whereas Stan went 2 for 3 with a couple of singles in his last game. And although Stan won a bunch of batting titles, he doesn't hold the record for most batting titles. What he has is that sustained excellence over a long period of time and a connection with one team, and somehow, outside St. Louis and the real baseball intelligentsia, his name just doesn't come up as often as it should or as prominently as it should.
Commissioner Bud Selig had to add the underrated Musial to baseball's All-Century team in '99, but it was an easy decision.
I've been thinking a lot about it in the last 24 hours, thinking about this, and I was lucky because in the 50s I watched Stan Musial play a lot. The great classic confrontations between Warren Spahn and Stan Musial were unbelievable to watch and to see, and I can still remember listening to the game at Wrigley Field where he got his 3,000th hit, and on and on and on. Look, he was a guy that, when you look back at his career stats, they're amazing. They're really remarkable. I mean, people in the 50s like to talk about Williams and for that DiMaggio and Mantle. And Musial is right there with all of them. And of course, the great part of Stan Musial, he was just as great a human being off the field as he was on the field. And so I can still remember, now that I think about it, the home run in Milwaukee at the All-Star game in 1955 in the 12th inning off of Frank Sullivan. I mean, but his career is just replete with great moments. And, when you think of the St. Louis Cardinals with that really wonderful history, great tradition, but you always think of Stan Musial first.
Musial brought class to the Cardinal franchise that few other teams had. Ozzie Smith was traded to the Cardinals before the 1982 season from San Diego and noticed early on what Stan's visits to the locker room meant.
When you think of the St. Louis Cardinals, you think of Stan right off the bat, and you think of the great tradition that the Cardinals have had through the years, which is something that I had not experienced there in San Diego. And they were still working on their tradition. I think they've come a long way since my days there in the late 70s. But the tradition that we have here, and Stanley certainly is the person that when you think of the St. Louis Cardinals, he's certainly the first name that comes to mind. Then comes Bob Gibson, So those are two guys that you certainly had heard, and I had an opportunity to see play. I didn't see Stan play as much as I got a chance to see Bob play, but those are two guys that you certainly admired from a distance.
Bud Selig knows well the superstardom of Stan the Man, and as a fan of the Braves in the 1950s, watched Musial from a distance, too.
In my day, it was not only Musial, but it was Hank Aaron, who had the same, and we can go on and on today. Today you have the Derek Jeters of the world, and there are a lot of them, but you're right, life has changed, society has changed, and from what people would think in the 40s and the 50s were a more placid time, I guess, as opposed to what happened in the 60s and then ever since. But players reflect society, but I have to tell you, when you look at Musial, and I remember when they voted for the All-Century team, because Stan Musial, in some sense, is a little bit like my friend Henry Aaron, because they were so good off the field, quiet, not sensational, just brilliantly did their job, and so they sometimes I often have felt, and I think history has made him more iconic, and I'm grateful for that. But look, Stan Musial, when you look at his career stats, they take your breath away. And then when you think of what he was, Henry Aaron told me about a trip he made to Korea with Stan Musial, and he related a lot of anecdotes, but it was just wonderful. It was two great American icons many, many years ago, many decades, of course, but we're going and doing the right thing, and that's what they did. So here's this great player, the symbol of Cardinal baseball, the symbol of what the 40s and 50s and early 60s were to baseball, and yet you could not meet a better human being than Stan Musial.
Fox's Joe Buck knew Stan the Man literally from the time he was born and got the chance to learn what a special human being he was around relative to the rest of his life.
I can tell you that as far as people who have had success on the field, people who have had a great effect in a community, people who, no matter where they go, are beloved, people who have never had a bad word said about them, that list seems to be dwindling as time goes on, and Stan's on that list. I've never heard one person ever say anything bad about Stan Musial, and I don't know anybody else in that category, and that's being honest. So, you look at his career numbers, you look at his accomplishments on the field, that's great, but I think what throws him over the top is the person that he is, and he's been consistent. He was consistent as a hitter, and he's consistent as a human.
Ozzie stayed in St. Louis like Musial and does everything he can for charity and fans like Stan did.
It's hard to duplicate a Stan the Man. He's so special in all the things that he was able to do, but he's a great person to model yourself behind. Not that I did. I just have always just tried to be as professional as I possibly can, and just so happened that coincidentally, I guess, if we kind of cut out of the same cloth, I think. We're both very competitive, and we truly love what we did, and think that that translates and carries over into our everyday life.
St. Louis Mayor Francis Slay recognizes Musial as a civic treasure.
I mean, he represents more than just a baseball player. First of all, he's one of the best baseball players that ever played the game, and he's right here in St. Louis. He's someone who, although he wasn't born here, he made St. Louis his home, and St. Louis is better for it. Stan has been engaged in the community in a whole host of different ways. He's been a role model for kids. He's got a great personality and a wonderful sense of humor, and you see him. I mean, he's visible.
One thing about Musial playing in St. Louis, there wasn't as much attention paid to what he did as there was to stars in the East. But Bob Costas says that shouldn't matter.
The same is true of DiMaggio or Williams, that a huge portion of their career really isn't documented on television. Perhaps they had more obvious, as I said, I'm repeating myself here, more obvious things to hang their hat on that contribute to legend outside their home markets. Than with Stan. But all you got to do is open up the record book. The guy hit .331 lifetime, and when he retired, he held virtually every significant National League record that there was to hold.
Herzog appreciated Stan the man on every level.
And if somebody would say to me, who is the perfect man, it would be Stan the man. And I first came here in 1980. I didn't know him that well. I'd been to his restaurant. I was in spring training against him a few times when I was playing. But I didn't realize what a great guy he was in all aspects of life. And I was a nobody when I was working for the Mets, director of player development. I was a very obscure major league player. And I'd go to his restaurant. Invariably, he'd come over and say hi and pick up my tab, wouldn't let me play. And just all his life, he's always been very giving. Very honest, very joyful, very talented, of course. But when I look back, and I played against some awful good players, but when I look back and take the playing ability, what kind of man they were, and the way they lived their life, I don't see how you could do it any better than Stan Musial.
He was about as perfect as a human being as there ever was. And with the departure of Albert Pujols to the Angels, we won't see anyone surpass the man as the man with the St. Louis Cardinals. Stan Musial passing away at the age of 92.
About to take me out to the ball game.
All right, I like it. All right. Hey, Stan Musial, ladies and gentlemen. All right. I like it.